Hello and welcome to The Price of Football, the show that looks at the money behind the beautiful game, with me, Kevin Day, and lecturer in football finance at Liverpool University, Kieran Maguire. Kieran, it's lovely to be with you again, if only because it means we are 3 days closer to the end of this terrible season. I really can't wait. I mean, I thought the Brighton-Newcastle game was bad enough, but the Palace game was just shocking. Did you watch it, Kieran, at all?
Yes, I watched bits and pieces, and it was just dreadful. There's nothing to get the blood running. I know.
Luckily, A League of Their Own is recording again. I'm working on it remotely, but I had a Zoom link to the studio, so I got so fed up during the Palace game that I went and listened to the cameramen moaning about the about the talent, basically. It's Thursday, Kieran, so it's news day. But if we run out of news, I also have 2 questions left over from Monday's pod, because it turns out, rather unprofessionally, I didn't turn over the last page of my script. So Mark Beashall and Charlie Bloxham, your wait could be over, unless Kieran goes on about something. But the wait is over, Kieran, for Bury fans, and this is the first time in some time we've been able to say good news for Bury fans, because AFC Bury or Bury AFC, whichever way round it, have confirmed their position in North West Counties Division 1, is that right?
That's right. So that's the 10th tier of English football. I would imagine they'll get a fairly decent following. So we wish them all the best. It's a shame that the Bury fan base has been split. Because Steve Dale is still playing people like a piano.
Yeah.
But this is a step forward. We've seen what's happened with AFC Wimbledon when they set up. So if Bury AFC can achieve what AFC Wimbledon have done, then God bless them, and we wish them all the best for the future.
Yeah, I've got mates who are AFC Wimbledon fans who say that those first 2 or 3 seasons in the lower tiers were the best seasons of their life, basically, where they were Charlie Big Potatoes for a few years, basically playing in car parks and gardens. But that's good news for Bury fans, and of course every football fan wishes them well. 2 big stories to start, and actually more good news for 2 clubs, Wigan and Sheffield Wednesday.
It's potentially good news. I mean, there was a story in the newspapers yesterday that the potential points deductions for both Wigan and Wednesday weren't going to be applied until next season. But then the EFL put out a press release to say, well, as far as they're concerned, Wigan's 12-point deduction will be applied when they finish the match on Wednesday night, and we're recording before then.
Yeah.
And that will be applied immediately unless Wigan launch an appeal. So Wigan they've now got David Phillips QC, who's on behalf of the administrators apparently is going to launch an appeal. So they got 14 days from tomorrow in which to formally put in for it. And then they got to wait up to another 21 days for a hearing. But if I did my sums, and that takes us to the 26th of August. So we could have a crazy situation where we don't know whether a club is going to be relegated or whether they're going to be saved or whatever, until the end of August, with the season due to start in early September. So it just seems that it's getting more and more farcical.
Well, I can only apologise to the Wigan fans if I implied it was good news. I thought it was actually good news, but not quite so. But I mean, also that knock-on effect of the delay, Kieran, means that potential owners are going to wait and see what happens before they put in a bid for the club, surely.
Very much so, and the administrators did set a 21-day target for selling the club, so that's due to coincide with the last day of the season, which made some sense because you would have thought initially that Wigan would have known in which division they were playing, and therefore that would impact upon the price. But as you rightly said, Kevin, if you don't know what you're buying in terms of the division and all of the TV money, then how can you possibly agree a price for the club?
Yeah, the other big story of the week, which came not long after we recorded our last pod, was Nigel Pearson being sacked by Watford with 2 games to go, which had the immediate effect of them losing 4-0 to Man City, managed by Hayden Mullins of this parish, who I'm sure was delighted to be asked to take over for the Man City game. It's not really our remit to discuss the football side of the story, Kieran, but how will it work in terms of compensation with Nigel Pearson being sacked in strange circumstances so close to the end of the season?
Well, it is a strange one because when he took over the club, they were in 20th position. Yeah, they were quite adrift at the bottom of the Premier League. When he departed, they were 4th bottom. Now, it is fairly common for sort of the red Adaires of the management union to have very big bonuses for avoiding relegation. I'm sure you'll remember Tony Pulis at Palace, where he had £2.5 million for saving the club, and then he got extremely greedy and quit and lost the money. And I don't think I've cheered Palace any more than when that verdict came through in favour of the club, because his behaviour, I thought, was very untoward. And I can't go into details, but I know a few more Tony Pulis stories, none of which present him in a particularly good light either. So as far as Nigel Pearson is concerned, I think that he will be taking legal advice from the LMA on the lines of, if Watford do stay up, or Watford were in a position where they were staying up when he left. So therefore, is he entitled to this bonus? This one could run and run.
Well, I suppose the other side of that as well is if they do go down, he's also exonerated of any blame as well, in a strange sort of way. But as I say, there are all sorts of rumours about the nature of the dismissal, and we don't know the details of his contract. But I mean, if the rumours were true, for example, of a physical altercation between him and club officials, presumably that would affect the nature of his compensation as well. And it won't only be him leaving, I guess, would it? There'll be other people going with him.
Well, presumably that would come under the umbrella of gross misconduct.
Yeah.
Managers and players have dust-ups all the time, so that's fairly taken. If it's someone from the non-playing staff, then perhaps it becomes slightly more complicated. We'll have to wait to see what happens. But I suspect most of these things, an agreement will be made. Both parties will sign non-disclosure agreements, and therefore it will be left to Twitter to work out exactly what happened.
Of course, who better to arbitrate on situations like that than Twitter? Now, Danny Cowley was also sacked by Huddersfield Town, despite keeping them up, which probably wasn't his job in the first place, to be honest. But there was something slightly tawdry about the announcement of Danny Cowley's dismissal, Kieran, wasn't there? Something I'm not particularly happy about as a decent human being.
Well, that was a really strange thing. I'd heard it was announced. So I went on to the Huddersfield Town website, and it says we announced that club statement, blah blah blah. Danny Cowley is leaving the club. And remember, that's after they paid Lincoln Town £1 million in compensation to recruit him in September. And then underneath it, sponsored by Laptops Direct. I'm going, you really want to be associated with getting rid of somebody who's just beaten West Bromwich Albion, by the way. It does seem, and then you read the club statement, and the club sees itself going in a different direction, and all of the nonsense that you get from press officers using management speak bollocks. When he was, if he's been sacked, then fine, but don't try to dress it up if it's some type of noble decision being made by the people in charge of the club.
Yeah, well, also, I mean, the marketing department at Huddersfield do seem to be quite creative, not always in the right way, because they had that strange Paddy Power situation, and in fact, if you watch Huddersfield's home games, there's that odd advertising board which says proudly unsponsored by Paddy Power. But this is a precedent. Marketing. Thank the good God, Kieran. I mean, even you're an accountant. Even you, I imagine, look down your nose at marketing people. But I can't understand why any company would, as you say, would want to be associated with that announcement. I can't imagine anybody reading that on the website and going, "I'm really sorry for Danny Cowley, but I do need a new laptop. That's handy." It's a strange one. I mean, basically, they're making money, presumably. I don't know if they've got a current arrangement with that company, but it would seem, as I say, tawdry for them to make money out of his dismissal. even now, I can't imagine Laptops United or Laptops R Us or whatever they are would have made a lot of money out of it.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I presume that they've got some form of longer term arrangement with the website, but to actually stick your name underneath such a decision, there's, as you say, nothing positive. And if I was a Huddersfield Town fan, I think Danny Cowley was fairly well liked as well. I think if there is bad feeling, it's probably going to other people at the club. So therefore, the last thing I'm going to do is say, sorry to see you lose your job. And as you say, let's pop down and buy ourselves a Toshiba 386 or something.
Yeah, mind you, to be fair, if Huddersfield Town's marketing department is that creative, maybe we should have a word, because we're getting no joy. We can't get a sponsor for love nor money in this climate. Maybe, right. Yeah, maybe next week, after all that hypocrisy, we'll say our first question is brought to you by Corals, our good friends. We travel the globe on this pod, Kieran. You literally. I mean, you've been. Where was it? Cyprus today in America. You've been lecturing.
So yeah, I've been teaching in Cyprus and New York because they're in different time zones. I managed to fit in 2 lectures.
Oh, you're serious. There can't be any spare space on your wall with the charts that you have. But Portugal, let's go to Portugal. Wouldn't that be nice? Let's go to Portugal, do the pod from there, Kieran. That'd be great. Sporting Lisbon fans may be getting a trouser full of extra money because quite a few bonuses for the Man United buy of Bruno Fernandes look like they're going to be kicking in.
That's right. The base fee for Bruno Fernandes was for €55 million. But it was very much tiered towards his achievements at Manchester United. So there's a potential 25 in total. And I think about the first tranche of that, about 8 or 9 million, is now going to go to Sporting. And rightly so, because he has transformed their season and they look a far better team with him in it than the previous to that. I mean, the only downside is that I know some people in Portugal and they say the bottom really has fallen out of the market there. And if you take a look at Portugal as a footballing country, it has a far greater proportion of players being sold to elsewhere in Europe than any other in terms of the money it generates. And he says the clubs have this as their business model. And if Fernandes, who was being sold in the COVID summer market, they'd struggle to get 30 to 35 million for him. So they're absolutely delighted that they did manage to sell him in January. And they've reaped all this extra money.
You may have heard me take a slight sharp intake of breath there, Kieran, because I assumed that you saying the bottom has fallen out of the market was going to lead us down another unsavoury carry-on type piece of material like we did the other day. I mean that sort of money. They're figures that some managers can only dream of, and one of those is Charlton manager Lee Bowyer. This is a strange one, Kieran, because this is not something I've heard of before. Lee Bowyer says he can't even open contract negotiations with some of his senior players because of an embargo. Does that sound plausible?
Unfortunately, it does. As we're aware, that the very despised Roland Duchâtelet, who was Charlton's former owner, he sold the club in January to Southall and Nîmes, who set up this company called East Street Investments. As we know, the owners and directors test isn't the greatest piece of legislation operating within the game. They passed the first test, i.e. they weren't jailbirds, but the second test, which was proof of funding, by all accounts, they failed. And therefore the EFL said you cannot sign any players until proof of funding is received. Now, since then, Charlton have now been sold to another guy called Paul Elliott. He bought the club in June, but then we've got a big question mark over the owners and directors test because this guy, Paul Elliott, says, I'm not buying it for myself. I'm fronting up a consortium, but I'm not going to tell anybody who's in the consortium until they've passed the owners and directors test. By all accounts, we've not received that information to date. So therefore, the ongoing transfer embargo applies. And I think as far as some of Charlton's players are concerned, they were loan signings with a view to making them permanent signings. So therefore, Lee Bowyer hasn't been able to secure those particular deals. And if you listen to him more and more, he's sounding incredibly grumpy.
Yeah.
And he's done very well as a manager to date. And I'm sure, given the current state of the job market, there will be offers for him, because he's clearly a guy that's perhaps at the end of his tether, having done a pretty good job under very trying circumstances.
Yeah, if Steve Parish is listening to this, not yet. Well, Lee Bowyer won for down the road, but not next season. I understand the transfer embargo, Kieran. I fully understand that. I don't always approve, but I understand. But Lee Bowyer is clearly implying that he can't actually talk to players that are currently at the club, senior players, about extending their own contract. And surely that would be a personal decision for the player, wouldn't it? I can't quite understand how the EFL would be able to get involved in individual contracts, but I mean that's clearly what he's implying.
Yeah, I guess it's for players whose contracts expire on the 30th of June or the 31st of July. And then perhaps either the players' agents are looking for more money, and it could be that under the EF rules that you're not allowed to offer existing players better deals than are on at present. So, yeah, but that's a bit of conjecture there. I can't guarantee that that's 100% proof.
Oh, I'll ask Swiss Ramble. He'll know. But I mean, it's a worrying development for Charlton fans, because that would indicate that there could be several players out of contracts. If they can't negotiate with Charlton, they're free to walk away to any other club, aren't they? That's not good news, is it?
Very much so. I mean, Lee Bowyer has said that he's arranged deals with some of the kids coming through the academy, but for the senior players, he's not managed to go forwards. And as soon as the season finishes tomorrow, then that's when you start planning for the next one, especially with such a short gap between 1920 and 2021.
Planning for the next one. There's a concept as a Palace fan I'm not used to. A good friend of mine is a Coventry City fan, and he used to run the cinema at the University of Warwick. So this next story is good news for him, because those two organisations have gone into partnership, and this does sound like good news for Coventry City. I nearly said going ahead then, Kieran. I would have had to go out and slap myself. But let's say in the future.
Yes, so this announcement came out this morning at 10 a.m. At 10:20, I was on Radio Warwickshire going through the details. I've
been on Radio Warwickshire. Don't go bandying names like Radio Warwickshire around like you're clever for going on Radio Warwickshire. I've done Radio Warwickshire, mate. I've publicised tours on Radio Warwickshire to little effect.
My last experience of Warwick University, when I was there, I was watching the women's rugby team, and they then came back to the bar and they managed to outdrink the men's rugby team, which I thought was an amazing achievement. So hats off to the team there.
How sinister must that have looked? A middle-aged teetotaler watching on while a group of young women outdrunk a group of young men. You've got a lot to answer for when you meet your maker, Kieran Maguire. Do you know that? How do you end up in these situations? I've spent my life trying to work myself into a situation that involves a women's rugby team getting drunk. Nothing. You just walk in there.
I just look innocent. I mean, I don't drink, I don't smoke, I don't gamble, I don't do drugs, but I am going to hell. Yeah,
you're a living Adam and the Ant song, aren't you? So, anyway, back to the story with the University of Warwick, which is good news for Coventry City.
Yes, I mean, Coventry have done extremely well this season. They've managed to get promoted from League One, despite having to play all their home games at Birmingham St Andrews, or the Trillion Trophy Stadium, to give it its full name.
Of course.
That's a strange one. Coventry are presently owned by a hedge fund called Sisu, and Sisu have been in dispute with, first of all, Coventry Council and then Wasps Rugby Club, who currently own the Ricoh Arena. And as a result of those disputes, they've ended up being effectively evicted. They played some matches at Northampton. Now they've had a season at Birmingham. So this is a chance for the club to have something that it can truly call its own. My concerns is, whilst it's great that the two parties have come together, and it was in, clearly it's within the remit of the Coventry area. Sisu are already owed £37 million by the football club, and then you've got the cost of building the stadium itself. And if Coventry are going to be realistic in terms of their ambitions of returning to the Premier League, then they've got to be looking at a 25 to 35,000 seater stadium, and that's going to cost a lot of money, because one of the things which they have been saying in the press release is that it's going to be a carbon neutral, sustainable green stadium, and that's not going to come cheap. And if I think about what we've got at the Amex, that cost over 100 million. So for Coventry to do similar 10 years later, you wonder how it's going to be funded, and how that money's going to, where that money is going to be sourced.
And just to clarify for those people who may have been distracted by our amusing on the buses style conversation about women's rugby teams, have the University of Warwick promised to buy them land, or are they giving them land that the University of Warwick already own to build this stadium?
It's land which is presently owned by the university. Now, whether they're going to gift it to them or whether they're going to sell it to them has yet to be seen. I'm fairly aware of UK universities' finances, and I can't see them giving it away for nothing. But there would be benefits to the university in having it there. Clearly it will increase traffic to some of the university facilities, to the accommodations and things of that nature. So there are benefits from an operational point of view, but I would also anticipate that the university would be looking to get a price for the land.
Yeah, and of course the caveat for any good news for Coventry fans is they're still owned by not good people, essentially. Again, it's like when you find out the Venkis are still involved with Blackburn. When you find out those people are still involved with Coventry after everything that's gone on, you really do feel for Coventry City fans. Now, the Man City decision last week, Kieran, that they're allowed to continue to play in the Champions League, we still don't know the details of the reason for the Court of Arbitration's decision, and it looks like we may never find out.
Well, that's right. CAS normally publish their results, but there was something in the papers which says if either party objects, and you can imagine that they both might feel that they've got good reason to object. If City, and we don't know the reasons, but if City have got off on a technicality, then perhaps they want to keep that relatively quiet. If UEFA decide, well, we've lost and we were a bunch of chumps in terms of the way that we presented the evidence, they too might decide that actually we'd rather we might not want to make ourselves look too foolish here. And under those circumstances, given that CAS ultimately is a private body and it's not a court as such, it's under no obligation to show the information. The only reason why, if an objection arises, that it could be shown is if the CAS president himself decides that it's in the public interest that the details are shown. And having watched Brighton's 0-0 draw with Newcastle last night, followed by Palace's equally fairly dull match against Wolves, frankly, I'd read anything than have to watch another live football match on television at present. So I'm desperate for this stuff to come out.
Yeah, so when I say that I would rather read the CAS decision than watch a Palace game, that's something incredible. For you to say it, Kieran, is less so, basically, because we know it's on your Christmas list as far as I'm concerned, along with many other spreadsheets, isn't it? So we know you'd like to do that anyway. Now, Kieran, before we talk about an old friend of the pod, I want to mention a new friend of the pod. We've made a new friend this week in Bobby Borisov, who sent us a lovely question last week. And in response to my idle speculation that he sounds like a Russian accountant or somebody you wouldn't like to cross swords with in a nightclub situation, very kindly pointed out that he was, in fact, a Bulgarian Arsenal fan. And we've had a correspondent, and I think it's safe to say that Bobby Borisov and I and you are the best of friends now, Kieran. I'm learning Bulgarian. I imagine you know a little bit already. Excuse my throat, by the way. There's a lot of shouting at the TV last night. So Bobby's one of our new friends, but one of our old friends is Mel Morris at Derby County, and Mel's caught your attention yet again, hasn't he, the rascal?
Yes, we all know that Derby County bought Pride Park for £81 million in 2018. And they did this through a company which Mel had set up. That's perfectly legal.
Yeah.
The price for 81 million.
Can I just say that I love the tone you get when you say that's perfectly legal. You imply that it is legal. It may not necessarily should be legal, but it's legal. That's perfectly legal.
It's within the rules, as Mel keeps telling anybody who's prepared to listen.
I just love the way you almost visually put quotation marks around those things. It's lovely. I can see you doing air commas as we speak.
But it now turns out that it looks as if Mel Morris has borrowed the money to buy the stadium from a gentleman called Henry Gaby. And Henry has set up a company called Rams Investment Limited, which lent the money to Mel. Now, Henry Gaby is also in charge of a company called Dual Asset Management, which has had 4 winding up orders, mainly from the HMRC, and also recently was subject to an extradition order by the German authorities, where he's presently living in France, due to tax issues. So you put all that together, and it just makes you feel a little bit nervous as to the money trail. Where did Henry get the money from? Because if he can't pay his HMRC bills here, there must be some strange trail of cash which allowed him to lend £81 million to Mel Morris to buy the Derby County Stadium for twice the amount that Gold & Sullivan sold the West Ham Stadium for in central London, or so East End of London, should I say, where you would think that property prices are a wee bit higher.
Well, surely, this is a question that HMRC would be asking as well, wouldn't they?
I think if they could get hold of Henry, they'd probably like to have a word with him. But as I say, he's presently living in France. And is playing peekaboo with the German authorities whenever they ask him to pop over the border to have a chat about tax issues there as well.
Well, if Henry was trying to buy Derby County, he sounds like the sort of chap who would sail through the EFL's fit and proper person test. But there's nothing, the EFL can't get involved at all in a situation like this. They've got no remit whatsoever to say to Mel Morris, we need you to explain where this chap's got the money from, because this is simply a private business matter between the owner of Derby County and his good friend Henry Gaby.
That's absolutely correct. So, the EFL owners and directors test would only apply if Henry decides that he is going to buy Derby County, and that particular ship, I think, has sailed in the sense that he seemed to lose interest earlier in the year, which then begs the question: why did he lend the money to Mel in the first place?
Yeah, do you know, I'd be interested to hear from Derby County fans about this, because this strikes me as one of those stories that's a little like Wigan, that we chuckle about these people who are obviously wrong-uns. I'm sure Henry is listening to this in France, might not like me saying that, but legally I'll take my chances. But it's one of those stories that I say we chuckle about it, but it doesn't sound like that's going to have a good ending to me. That's there's a lot of, as you say, red flags being raised right there, aren't there?
Unfortunately so. And, Derby themselves are up on a charge from the EFL, and that one's not been resolved. And that's another potential points deduction. And these things are dragging on too long. The Derby case was, the charges were January. We're now, towards the arse end of July. Sheffield Wednesdays were November. And the problem is that if the decisions aren't made quickly, and it means that the likes of Barnsley and Luton potentially end up being relegated, you can see them taking legal action because they feel that they have been discriminated against due to the prevarication in making a ruling on these clubs.
Yeah. Do we know what the rate of interest is on this loan by any chance?
I've not seen anything because Mel Morris, as we've previously discussed, isn't particularly quick at publishing his accounts.
Yeah, fair enough. But this would that's one of the things that would have to be included on an account sheet, presumably.
Yeah, if they are full accounts, yes. If they use those abbreviated ones, which, as you know, get my blood boiling, then you wouldn't necessarily see the numbers.
Not just your blood as well. I think it's become a pattern on Twitter. A lot of football fans, inspired by you, I'm sure one or two of them listening to this podcast maybe will become a stand-up comedian, but there's a lot of our listeners inspired by who have been looking at the accounts of their own club, which is a good thing. I mean, in years to come, it's a great thing for football fans if they're able to do so and interpret them. But every day we get new tweets from people going, "My bloody club have done the abbreviated accounts," and it's angering people, isn't it? And it's not something that ever occurred to me, but there are increasingly people are getting worried by it because it's human nature just to worry about the fact that your club is doing the abbreviated accounts, because you can't help but feeling they're hiding something, even though, as we've pains to say, they're entirely legally able to do so, aren't they?
That's right. And the thing is, it is their club.
Of course.
The club belongs to the fans, and therefore the fans, in my view, are entitled to full disclosure, because the clubs can't have it both ways. They can't keep saying to the fans, "Oh, we're skin. Any chance of deferring or declining your rebate on your season ticket?" And the fans say yes, and then going back to Derby, Derby themselves have asked the players to take pay cuts, and then their chief executive wanders into the Derby training ground with a brand new Porsche with personalised number plates.
Yeah.
And at the same time, the club's furloughing staff, getting other people to take pay cuts. It does seem that club at times is a bit of a tin ear.
Yeah, if you were writing a sitcom about the travails of a football club and you had a dodgy owner and you wrote in the scene where he turned up in a Porsche, the director would say, "I think we need to rein that down a little bit. That's not quite right." And yet there he is. And do you know what? I do love the fact that up and down the country, suddenly club owners are going, "I've had another bloody email from some bloke called Terry who wants to have a look at the accounts," which is, I think it's all credit to Kieran Maguire. There's this woman called June who says, "Why are we doing abbreviated accounts?" Anyway, we haven't actually mentioned COVID for quite some time, which is a blessing. But this next story is specifically COVID-based because League One and League Two clubs have threatened strike action, Guy says, if they have to bear the costs of COVID testing throughout next season. And as a reminder, Kieran, to some of our newer listeners, could you tell us how much those costs are? Because they're quite substantial, aren't they?
Yeah, I think it's estimated to be about £150 per player.
Yeah.
And if they're going to be working in effectively these little bubbles together, then I think they need to be tested twice a week. So you've got 25 players. You start to do the sums. And if you're a League One and League 2 club and you've got no match day income coming in, your TV income is peanuts compared to that of the Championship and certainly the Premier League, then it does become questionable as to whether or not you can afford to take the players out of furlough and to bring them back, A, to pay them a wage, and then B, you've got the additional costs with no income coming in. There is, in theory, a 12th of September restart in the EFL, but no fans attending until October.
Yeah.
So some clubs are now saying, well, we don't want any midweek fixtures to take place during the early period until the fans return. But you then start to look at the fixture list and it just becomes horrendous.
Yeah.
So a lot of clubs, including, I think, the likes of Ipswich, have said, we're going to be losing so much money. We don't want to start football again because it's putting the club's future existence at risk by taking such an approach.
It's hard to see how strike action would affect it, though. I mean, refusing to play is kind of cutting off the nose to spite the face in this situation a little bit. And I talk as an ex-human resources manager. For me, strike action is always a failure of management, not of unions. It should never be allowed to get to that stage. But it seems a strange option to take in this situation, doesn't it?
It does. I mean, it could be a little bit of gunboat diplomacy. I mean, with a bit of luck, we'll have made enough progress in the testing processes so that those costs will be substantially reduced by the next month or two. In which case, it could be that the whole issue disappears. Yeah,
I always think back to one of my more reactionary colleagues whose response to any threat of strike action by workers was call in the army. So maybe that's what we could do. Just get League One and League Two played by. Never mind. one story. Just have time to get to the two questions that I shamefully forgot to get to. Two pieces of paper were stuck together. I didn't know. These things can happen to the best of. I'm sure it happened to Parkinson once. I'm sure he ended up asking Helen Mirren a question he meant to ask George Best, and she had no idea why he was asking her about Miss World. But the SPFL up in Scotland, our good friends, have announced that all 42 clubs will participate in the Scottish League Cup, which is a positive announcement, I think, because there was a stage when it looked like a lot of Scottish clubs wouldn't survive till that stage.
Yeah, well, again, it sounds good. They're not necessarily participating. All 42 clubs are being invited to play in the Scottish League Cup, along with Kelty Hearts and Brora Rangers, who are the winners of the Lowland and the Highland Leagues.
Yeah.
But if those clubs feel that the match is going to be taking place, but not in front of an audience, because remember, the Scottish government has a different set of rules to that of what's happening in England. Those clubs will also be given the option to opt out of participating. I think under the Scottish League Cup rules, you normally start off with a small group stage.
That's right. Yeah.
And you could have 2 or 3 games in a week where you're having to pay the players in front of nobody for no TV audience as well. And you can imagine if you were a club owner or the supporters group, you say, well, who's benefiting from this? Because nobody's even going to see the games apart from the players themselves.
Yeah, see, once again, I'm going to have to read these questions more carefully when Guy sends them through, because that's the third question when I thought, well, this is good news. And it turns out on cursory examination, it's not particularly good news at all. That's my fault. That's a failure of research and a little bit of Guy's questions. Speaking of which, let's finish with the two questions we didn't get to on Sunday. The first question, Kieran, comes from Mark Beashall. I hope I've pronounced that correctly, Beashal, or the form Guy's in at the moment, it could be Smith, who knows. But Mark's question is, this is what happens when Guy's not here when we record. Mark's question is, and again, both the questions we got are about broadcasting. They're both very valid questions. Mark says it seems to me that most clubs have a large number of fans around the world who rarely attend games but would be happy to pay £5 to £10, his figures, to watch streamed matches, home or away. And he gives an example of Laura Marling, who did a live stream from Union Chapel in London last week, which only holds 800 people, but 6,500 people watched it live on stream. I wrote a show for Oxford Playhouse last week, similarly seats 650 people, and we had 1,400 people watching it. The economics were such that we had to charge slightly more than £5 to £10. But it seems to me that's quite a decent suggestion. But also, as I recall, when Amazon first got involved in football last year, over Christmas and New Year, they were talking about that being one of their models as well, that in future they would be looking maybe to live stream every game.
Yes. I mean, the issue with streaming is it going to replace what we presently have in terms of broadcast? And we've got to remember that the Premier League is bringing in £3 billion a season from traditional TV satellite sales. So you would have to do, if you do the maths, you'd have to sell an awful lot of these packages. And I think they would work for a select number of clubs. The Manchester United have enough of a global fan base for that to be potentially lucrative for them. The same with the likes of Liverpool and Chelsea and so on. But if you drop down into the Championship and it's Reading versus Middlesbrough on a Tuesday night, how many people are going to pay that £5 or £10 when potentially it's clashing with Champions League? Potentially that there are other things being broadcast. You might be looking at things on Netflix. You might be looking at the traditional broadcasters and so on. So it does have some merits. But remember, the EFL do have their own streaming service called iFollow. And the money being generated through iFollow, I think if you talk to the clubs involved in the EFL, they've been quite disappointed that not many people have signed up. And also, those people that have signed up, they haven't been particularly impressed with the quality of the service involved. Although, if we get the likes of Amazon involved, they are an incredibly professional outfit, and I'm sure that the standard that they provide would perhaps be better.
But the cost is quite an interesting one, because the show we did for Oxford Playhouse, which is still available on YouTube for a donation, by the way, for another 3 weeks, it was very good, though I say so myself. We charged, or Oxford Playhouse, I think, charged £20 per household to watch it live as it went out, because people desperately wanted to watch a show live, even if it was from their own house, and they wanted to feel they were watching it at the same time as other people. We charged £20 per household, but knowing full well that there could be 5 or 6 people in that household who watched it. Now, excuse me, somebody like Amazon are going to be saying, well, if we charge £20 per household, when lockdown's finished, you could have 20 mates basically around to watch it in your house. So technically they're only paying £1. So I wonder whether they would charge so much that it becomes economically unattractive for football fans anyway, because the broadcasters won't do it, clubs won't do it unless they can make money out of it. And it seems to me that Mark's figure of £5 to £10 is very optimistic.
I think that's a valid point. Remember, we could do exactly the same with Sky. You and I could both sack off Sky, and we just go around to a mate's house, in a non-COVID world. But we don't. I think we quite like watching it when there is an atmosphere and the matches are worthy of being watched, and that's not such a bad experience. Well, I think we'd have to wait and see. But remember, if the streaming is going to work, it's got to first of all be able to effectively guarantee it's going to replace the £3 billion the Premier League is generating at present. And then you've got to work out how you're going to split the money. For all of the faults of the Premier League, the way it distributes broadcasting money is one of the most democratic in UEFA countries. And that's what makes it such an unpredictable and relatively competitive league until, we effectively take the last 2 seasons where we've had 2 outstanding teams. Prior to that, there was a fair amount of competition, and you were never quite sure who was going to win the Premier League at the start of it.
And to be fair, the way the Premier League's shaping up next season with United and Chelsea splashing the cash, it looks like that could be the case next season. Our last question, Kieran, hung over from Monday, much like me, is from Charlie Bloxham. And I'm kind of throwing Charlie to the wolves here because I think this is a really good question, but it's also such an obvious question. I've been slightly reluctant to ask it myself in case you give me that look. Now, I can't actually see you, but I know what that look is. I live in fear of that look, Kieran. It's like one of the teachers at school that only has to look at you for you to start going, oh, my God. But Charlie's question is simply this. Why are Premier League clubs having to rebate TV broadcasters when even more games are being shown on TV at the moment than ever before?
And it's a very valid question from Charlie. The reason why...
It's my question
and you, Kevin. The reason why is that the broadcasters signed up for matches for a season which would end in the second week of May, and they had other sports lined up for the rest of May, June, July, and so on.
Right.
So therefore, the Premier League has failed to deliver during lockdown, during March, April, and May, and as a result of that, the broadcasters have had to give rebates to their subscribers. So what the broadcasters are doing, they're saying, well, if we're having to give money back because we've not been able to deliver to our subscribers, we in turn are going to demand that money back from the Premier League itself.
Right, but it's kind of worked out well for them though, because we've finally been able to show cricket, but there's no tennis as such, apart from Novak Djokovic's ill-fated tournament. So it's kind of filled a big gap for them, hasn't it? Because I mean, this time of year normally, I can't imagine that golf, popular as it is, would get as many viewers as Premier League football games have been getting for Sky. So it's kind of helped them fill a gap, hasn't it?
It has helped fill that gap, and what Sky have done as a result of that, and BT and some of the other broadcasters, is that they have reduced the amount of the rebate.
Right.
Originally, it was going to be £750 million. It's now been reduced to 360 due to sort of a goodwill feeling that yes, we now have something to show our viewers. Although it's not filling it to the same 24/7 that Sky would hope, because so many other sports have failed to deliver during this period.
And do you think, Kieran, that they will do a separate deal for next season for before crowds coming back and after crowds coming back? Because it seems to me, I mean, obviously the broadcasters are the people that are really driving to get people back into stadiums. So, I mean, will they be expecting a rebate until October and November, when perhaps the Premier League can get 30, 40, 50% people in, and then do another deal? Or will the deal, has the deal already been done? Are we in the middle of a 3-year period, so to speak?
Well, we are presently at the end of year one of the 3-year cycle between the Premier League and the domestic broadcasters. Now, the broadcasters will have signed up for X matches in August, September, and so on. Provided the Premier League deliver on that, then there's no reason why a rebate should be given, even if there aren't any crowds. I suspect if you go through the paperwork, it's what the contract says is you've got to play a match on the 14th of August or whenever it's going to be, and it's not going to say there's got to be a minimum of X thousand people in attendance. Right. So I think they'll be safe from that. The clubs themselves, of course, will still be hurting, because merchandise sales will be down because people won't be going to stadia. Ticket sales will be down. Catering sales will be down. So the clubs are still going to have a fairly long period until they start to generate income. And then we've got this surreal situation of 40% of people are going to be going to games. Well, which 40%? Yes,
yeah, which we discussed on the last pod. I mean, that's for football. So, I mean, as long as we can start getting some people in, I've still got this feeling that the third round of the FA Cup will be when we're looking to get people back to full capacity, but which isn't that long away, really, to you think about it. So, but Charlie, thank you for that question. I'm sorry I threw you out in front of me like a human shield when I asked it. If you have questions for us, it's questions@priceoffootball.com, because we will be back next Monday with a question special, as ever. Don't worry if you think your question's not a clever one. It will be to me, might not be so to Kieran. If it's club specific, if it's about anything in the world, please ask us a question and we will do our best to answer it. In the meantime, Kieran, there's only one round of games to go, and then a couple of weeks off and we'll be back again.
Yeah, and I'm struggling to look forward to the end of this season or the start of next one, but hopefully, and yeah, this sometimes happens before when you've had a bit of a bobbing season or something. It's not gone the way you think. As soon as the fixtures come out, you start to get excited. But I suspect my reaction will be the fixtures are out, and then I won't be going to those matches for another 3 months. But we've got to be positive. Football is taking place. The number of people who are suffering from this horrible disease in the UK appears to have gone down significantly, although we can't say that for other countries around the world. So, and football it's better than nothing, but not much at present.
Yeah, and we're seeing pilot schemes very soon for cricket and horse racing. So hopefully it won't be far behind till people can start to get to their grounds. In the meantime, thank you for listening, everybody, and we will be back on Monday. Have a lovely last weekend of the season.
Stay safe, boys and girls.
The price of football. The price of football.